Hello, today is Tuesday, May 26th, and for today's video, I was inspired about something I'm doing with my students and that my wonderful co-teacher has started to teach my students about, and that's author's purpose, right? Why is the author choosing to write what he or she is writing? And traditionally speaking, in the middle school level, we tend to focus on three types of author purpose, and we have a really great acronym to help students remember, and that's PIE, P-I-E, right? So we're going to go through those first three, and then we're going to talk about two additional ones that really come into play as we start to get a little bit more comfortable with that, and we start expanding our writing and our ability to talk about writing and reading. And that's something, you see more as we get onto the high school level and obviously when you move on to college. So right off the bat, let's start with the P in PIE, and that's persuade. So when an author's purpose is to persuade readers to believe something or accept something, right, it's really important as a reader to be able to identify that. One, so that you understand what is happening to you. And this is incredibly important right now, right? And I want to say that, besides understanding it for reading, we really need to understand it for digital media because, and this video will be uploaded to YouTube. All anybody needs to do is spend about 5 minutes on YouTube before you start to understand how important it is to understand author's purpose, or in this case, creator's purpose, because it is incredibly common to find so much media out there that has very clear intent and purpose that if you're not quite sure what's going on, you could start to be led astray, right? There's a ton of conspiracy theory stuff online and weird videos out there that because of YouTube's strange algorithms, that if you watch one video, you might start getting a bunch of it dumped into your feed. So it's really important to understand author's purpose, or creator's purpose in this case. So when it's persuade, right, when that person, that creator, that author is attempting to persuade readers or listeners or viewers, you really want to be aware of that, right? And there's a couple of things for you to look for and to keep an ear open for, right? So for example, they're trying to get you to believe something, and as such, they're going to use very strong language. Right? There's going to be a lot of hyperbole. And if you remember from a video a long time ago, hyperbole is that gross exaggeration for emphasis or effect, right? It's very powerful. So when somebody wants to persuade you about something, they're going to use a lot of hyperbole because, it's very appealing, right? It's something that really stands out. They're also going to tend to attack or maybe try to diminish opposing viewpoints or opposing sides, because that's a key thing. If you want to persuade somebody that something A, case A, is the right thing, one of the ways a lot of people do it is by showing that case B is wrong or bad, right? And that's a big thing. For example, a lot of people wrongly think that dogs are, the superior pet, and they try to do that by saying that cats are aloof and, unaffectionate, which is just clearly wrong. Right? And obviously I'm joking about that, but that highlights something that people do. When they're trying to persuade you of something, they attack the opposite thing. And that's something you have to be careful for. There's a lot of forceful vocab, right? There's strong language in there. When I say strong language, I don't mean like explicit or, inappropriate language. I mean, they use a lot of strong words to highlight something, right? So they say something is the best or the most important or clearly superior, but then when they're talking about that opposing viewpoint, typically they'll say things that have negative connotations. And connotations were something we spoke about again in another video. So when they're persuading, you have to be aware of that and look for those things. And again, just to make sure we're clear, persuasion isn't necessarily something that's bad, all right? I like to persuade people not to do things like smoke because it's bad for your health, right? And there's a ton of campaigns by the Department of Health to convince children not to do it, right? They're trying to persuade you, and that's a positive thing. So don't think that because people are trying to persuade you of something, they're doing something wrong. But it is important to be aware of when it's happening. Right? So the next one is to inform. That's the I in pie, right? And this one is pretty straightforward, and typically we're talking about nonfiction here. So you get a lot of presentation of facts when somebody's informing you. And we have to be careful here, because in persuasion, you'll get a lot of facts presented to you, but typically in a very biased way. When someone's trying to inform you, they tend to present those facts more objectively, right? And typically the language surrounding those facts is a lot more neutral. It's not that forceful language. You don't have a lot of that hyperbole surrounding that fact as you do with persuasion. So when they're trying to inform, they're going to present you with facts. They're typically going to be very objective, not going to be implying a lot of opinion on there. And again, just strictly to give you information. Now, be aware that sometimes when they're trying to persuade, they'll mask it as information. So just be aware of that. Now, the E in pie is entertainment, right? So the author's purpose, the creator's purpose is to entertain you, right? And typically, most of us can pick that out because we find it funny or engaging or thrilling. So you have a lot of use of things like humor or drama, suspense. Authors will use cliffhangers or start in ways where they start in media res, in the middle of action to draw you in. So entertainment is typically relatively easy. Now, there have been a couple of very famous cases where entertainment, things that were created as entertainment, were done so purposely as to mirror a different form, like to inform. And one of the most famous examples, of course, was War of the Worlds, which started off, with the radio play by Orson Welles. And, it was played on the radio and it was done up like a news broadcast. And many people reportedly who heard it didn't realize it was entertainment. They thought it was an informational thing from the news and were worried that there were actual aliens invading. So a wonderful story. Everyone should check out the original broadcasts of that just to hear how that worked. Again, that's entertainment. Right? So that takes care of our pie, our persuade, inform, entertain pieces. Now let's move on to the final two, which we have explain. Now, when an author's trying to explain something, they use a lot of bulleted or numbered lists. They will provide things in sequential order with a lot of emphasis put on those sequential steps, right? They want to explain how to do something. So perhaps this is something like explaining how to bake something. Over the last 8 weeks, I have started doing a lot of baking. So I've started learning how to bake challah breads and popovers and shortcakes and so forth. And as I've read about those, there have been sequential order of steps and bulleted lists of what I need to do, right? Those authors who wrote those pieces were doing so to explain, right? They're trying to tell you how to do it, right? The very first time I ever did work on my car that was beyond simple things like an oil change, when I did the suspension on it, I had to read from various people on how to change certain pieces of the suspension. And, they did it in a list in a sequential order on how to do it, right? So the author's purpose was to explain the order of something, right? The last one would be describe, and that's the D in there. So they're describing something. Now, just as if you were using narrative writing and you wanted to be descriptive, right? We're using sensory words. So an author's purpose is to describe, they're going to rely a lot on those sensory words. And remember, sensory words are words that appeal to our five senses, our sense of taste, our sense of smell, our sense of sight, our sense of sound, and our sense of touch, right? So a lot of sensory words that appeal to all of those, a lot of descriptive language in order to describe something. And usually you get very thorough descriptions in that case. So those are our five main things. Remember, persuade, inform, and entertain would be our three main ones for our middle school level. And then as we become more sophisticated and comfortable with that, we move on to being able to talk about authors who are trying to explain things and describe things. And that's it for today's video. I hope everyone's well. As always, if you want me to cover something, please just reach out to me. Give me an email or some other forms of communication, and I'll do my best to cover it. We're nearing the end of the traditional academic school year, but that doesn't mean the end of learning. please take every opportunity you have to just engage in life and learn from everything. Anytime you're outside is an opportunity to do so. I hope everyone's well. Until next time, be good.